Welcome to Trident Astrology. I'm Janine Kane. Today I'm going to be going over the May weekly forecast for the 24th through the 31st. This is a very important week as we begin the eclipse season with a full supermoon total lunar eclipse at 5 degrees and 26 minutes of Sagittarius occurring on Wednesday, May 26th. We also this week we have our second Mercury retrograde of 3 Mercury retrogrades happening this year. This occurs on Saturday, May 29th. The themes connected to these events include awakening perspective, increasing mental flexibility, evolving ideas and identity, opening our minds, seeking higher destiny and finding our path, slowing down our minds, and being mindful. Let's get started. Okay, so we begin this week with a full supermoon total lunar eclipse at 5 degrees and 26 minutes of Sagittarius. This is occurring on Wednesday, May 26th. This is the first eclipse of the year, the first of 4. We can have up to 7 eclipses in a year. This year we have a small reprieve from last year's intensity. Last year we had 7 eclipses. This year we have the minimum of 4. Eclipses do occur in pairs, and so the next eclipse occurring in this pairing will be on June 10th. It will be a new moon annular solar eclipse at 19 degrees of Gemini. So this lunar eclipse here is powerful for 3 reasons. First, it is a total lunar eclipse, meaning that the moon is completely covered by the Earth's shadow. This is the second of 3 perigene moons, or a supermoon, this year, which means the moon is at its closest proximity to Earth, making the moon's pull at its strongest. And thirdly, in order for a lunar eclipse to occur, the luminaries, the sun, and the moon must be within at least 12 degrees of the lunar nodes. The closer the luminaries are to the nodes, the more powerful the eclipse. This eclipse is 5 degrees apart. There's a 5-degree difference between them, which makes it very, very significant and powerful. Now, the importance of eclipses. Eclipses occur when the luminaries are in a particular distance from the lunar nodes. So the lunar nodes represent our collective and individual path of evolution. It's our karmic destiny. So when we have a full moon lunar eclipse, our collective and individual paths of destiny are illuminated and intensified. So eclipses are very important times for aligning ourselves with our true path, collectively and individually. It can be a time of great spiritual and psychological evolution and growth. So the meaning of this moon in Sagittarius, the moon and the sun are on the axis of insight. That's Gemini and Sagittarius. It's the axis of Gemini and Sagittarius. So this is about gathering information from all perspectives versus integrating information into a cohesive philosophy and worldview. When we're out of balance on the Sagittarius end, individuals and groups can become dogmatic, ideological, not considering other available perspectives of information. So in other words, we become closed-minded and opinionated, polarized, and we can see that happening. So that's kind of the shadow side of the dynamic of the axis of insight that includes the Gemini and Sagittarius axis. When we're out of balance on the Gemini end, individuals and groups are overwhelmed with so much information that they are incapable of forming a cohesive viewpoint or a philosophical stance. So we have difficulty discerning truth. There's confusion or overwhelm. And we can see that playing out as well. But there's also positive sides to this. What we're trying to evolve is beyond the shadow side of this axis. It's about awakening our perceptions in ways that develop open-mindedness and critical evaluation, helping us move away from polarization, idealism, and ideologues. So that is a main emphasis of this total lunar eclipse, supermoon, is trying to illuminate how we are creating perspective in the world, individually and collectively. Are we moving into polarization, or are we more open-minded? Are we being able to see others' perspective? So depending on where the moon falls in your chart, somewhere in your life experience, your worldview and mental flexibility is going to be challenged. Your perspective will be stretched to a greater horizon to see varying points of view. There is going to be like a perspective testing. I know for myself, I have the moon in Sagittarius falling in my 7th house, which is about relationships. So I'm definitely seeing some testing and perspective of my relationships, where I am in my relationships, how I'm viewing others and myself, and my relationship to others. Some of the goals of this eclipse include evolving ideas and our identity, being mentally flexible, moving beyond polarization, opening our mind, seeing beyond it's this way or that way thinking. This is also a really good time for heightening our spiritual perspective and perception, to become more aware and knowledgeable of life of eternal mystery. Not just, okay, this is the truth, this is my perspective, and this is how it is, and polarize this and polarize that. It's about opening up to the mystery of life, that a lot of truth and idealisms that we hold on to are just belief systems, forming a philosophy, but maybe aren't the truth. And we need to, I think, maybe open our minds, each one of us open our minds more. I think some really good practices during this time, during this lunar eclipse, is meditation, riding our bike, going on a picnic, walking in the park, conversing with a friend, listening to other perspectives, whether or not you agree. And that's the challenging part there. Being mindful of our own judgments of others. Looking at maybe some false assumptions that we might have that we think are truths. Evaluating critically our truths. Looking at what is truth. What is a universal truth? How do I know what is truth? These are big questions that we individually and collectively need to be looking at. We need to be putting ourselves in other people's place, like putting ourselves in the place of another person, trying to open our minds to other varying perspectives, making sure that when we communicate diplomatically and justly, practice moral judgment, and having compassion for ourselves and others. And I think this north and south node being illuminated here by this lunar eclipse is about moving us into a greater collective capacity to hold other people's worldview and not without judging it, and having more compassion for varying worldviews. And that's challenging. And especially right now, especially with the propaganda happening in our world. All right, well, that's enough of that. So on Saturday, May 29th, let me pull this up for you. We have Mercury Retrograde happening at 24 degrees and 43 minutes of Gemini. So we're having a lot of Gemini energy going on here. Mercury will go direct on the 22nd at 16 degrees and 8 minutes of Gemini. So the retrograde shadow is a period before and after the retrograde when Mercury revisits the degrees covered during the retrograde. So basically, Mercury here, it starts a retrograde at 24 degrees. It's going to retrograde until June 22nd when it hits about 16 degrees. And then it's going to go direct and move back into 24 degrees. And so there's this shadow area. And so this occurs just before and after the retrograde. And so that can actually intensify the Mercury retrograde influence, actually. So, I mean, I felt this retrograde much earlier than when it started. I felt it a couple weeks ago, and I was like, wow, this is definitely the shadow. So the pre-retrograde shadow already occurred. That was from 14th to 28th. It already started. And then we have the post-retrograde shadow, which is from June 23rd through to July 7th. So we're going to have this Mercury retrograde energy for quite some time. The ancient symbolism of Mercury is significant here when we're talking about Mercury retrogrades and what it means. So Mercury is hermaphroditic. It's androgynous, and it signifies the process of universal consciousness learning from opposites in order to discover and learn balanced, reflective, and flexible thoughts. It represents universal consciousness, learning from polarity of the yin and yang principles. The hermaphroditic nature of Mercury comes from its symbolic combination of the masculine yang and the feminine yin principles. And this, I mean, harkening back to what we were talking about with the north and south nodes in Gemini and Sagittarius, Mercury rules Gemini. And so we're taking that Geminian energy, that Mercurial energy, and trying to find balance and interpolation between polarities in things, in reality. And so that's a challenge. So planets represent psychological operations. So Mercury is the mind. It represents perspective, the thoughts. It represents consciousness. It's the wayfinder. It's a psychopomp. So it can move between ectopsychic realm and the endopsychic realms of the consciousness. And so as such, Mercury symbolizes an inclination to comprehend paradox. So Mercury represents an inclination to comprehend paradox. And so even collectively with that total lunar eclipse that's happening this week, we're here to test the boundaries of our perspectives and to comprehend paradox, which is extremely challenging. What does this mean for the Mercury retrograde? Well, let's look at the historical ancient symbolism of Mercury. So here is the symbol of Mercury. It comes in three parts, 1, 2, and 3. The first part is spirit. It symbolizes the awareness of spirit experiencing physical manifestation. It's kind of ectopsychic in that way, in that it's spirit that is aware that I am a spirit in this physical world. The circle part represents the Tao. It's like the unknown. It's like the deep unconscious realms of our psyche. It's completely unknown. It's unknown. It will be always unknowable because it's infinite, just like the circle represents infinity. The third part is the cross of matter, and this represents physical manifestation. The reason why it represents physical manifestation is because it represents the cardinal points. Aries, which is this spring equinox, Libra, which is the autumnal equinox, Cancer, which is the summer solstice, and Capricorn, which is the winter solstice. And so it basically represents the cyclical nature of reality. And Mercury altogether represents the soul experiencing, universal consciousness experiencing and witnessing itself in physical manifestation. So how does this relate to Mercury retrograde? So basically, universal consciousness is learning from the polarity of opposites of spirit, of yin and the yang, of the explicate, the implicate. It's learning from the ectopsychic, which is the yang, and the endopsychic, which is the yin, the known, which is yang, and the unknown, which is yin. Okay, so when Mercury goes retrograde, what's happening is our mental energy, our mental perspective is forced to move inwards from the material to the spiritual. When it goes direct, our mental energy is then forced from the spiritual back into the physical focus. So that's basically what's happening with the symbolism here when we go into a Mercury retrograde. So its symbolism here even kind of shows that. So basically, when Mercury goes retrograde, we're moving from the yang to the yin. We're moving from the implicate to the explicate. We're moving from the feminine to the masculine to the feminine. We're moving from the ectopsychic to the endopsychic, from the known to the unknown. So during a Mercury retrograde, technology malfunctions, appointments are delayed, there might be all these kind of little slight mishaps, but they're there for a purpose. They're there to delay gratification. They're there to put our mind focus from the instant gratification of the physical manifestation and move us into the spirit realm. So that's why that happens. It's teaching us to trust the flow of life. So with Mercury in Gemini going retrograde, our minds have the opportunity to open ourselves to flexibility of perception and inner self-reflection. And that's kind of what we should all be doing when Mercury goes retrograde. I know a lot of us bemoan it. Oh no, Mercury retrograde, because I'm not going to get my way. Well, life is not about getting our way, is it? 2020 definitely proven that to us all. But it is a good time for introspection. It's a good time for slowing down. It's a good time to be patient and let go of control, basically. Trust spirit, trust the flow of life, move into the feminine. Some activities that we all may want to engage in during this time, I would suggest meditate, daydream, go for a long walk, work on projects that you have been procrastinating on. But definitely remind yourself that whenever there's a mishap, it's there to kind of remind us that, oh, good, I don't have control. I'm just going to slow down. I'm going to slow down for a minute. So yeah, this whole week basically is about moving and shifting our perspectives, trying to gain a more broader worldview, slowing down, being more reflective, moving into our spirit, moving into ourselves more deeply. So that's it for this forecast. Next week, future highlights for next week. We have main focus will be Venus entering into Cancer. That's going to be an interesting shift there. And we also have the Sun Moon waning square in Gemini and Pisces. As we can see here, we have some outer planets interacting with some inner planets. So we've got Chiron, Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto all impacting the Sun, Venus, and Mars. So that'll be interesting to be covering next week. So I really appreciate you joining me for another Trident Weekly Astrology Weekly Forecast. And I really look forward to you joining me next week. I'll try to make sure weekly forecasts will be posted on weekends, no later than Monday for the week ahead. I look forward to seeing you next time. So blessings and love.